Welcome back to Megs Mysteries. The Wrong Number Murders. Listening to my grandfather, Pops we called him, his tales and life story of his work, they always excited me, and I loved hearing them when I was young. But now I'm reading all his old case files. The most interesting ones are kept in his attic. Now he's gone, and I'm going all over his things and learning just how much more his life's work was. It was a real thriller. My name is Jamie Graves, and I'm into old noir, thrillers, and horror stories, just like the old radio shows of the golden age of radio. Now you can look up all the old shows with just a touch of the button on a computer or phone, or just ask Google. But now I'm actually reading his cases that could be a true crime and suspense mystery. Pop used to tell me about his favorite radio shows of the 1930s. One was called The Shadow. Catchphrase, "Who knows what lurks in the heart of men? The Shadow knows." Another one was Suspense, a classic horror radio show. And then there was The Inner Sanctum, ghost and horror creep show. But my favorite was The Adventures of Sam Spade, a detective show, just to name a few. The reason I'm telling you this is the case of the Wrong Number Murders. It was 1953, and one of Pop's real famous cases. Pop's, John Grave, and his partner, John Smith. Yeah, that was his real name, but everybody called him Smitty. They worked the case from the start. It was a very strange case because it was mimicking one of the popular radio shows at the time. A thriller story called Who's Calling from the radio series Wait for Midnight. It was a weekly series everyone was hooked on. It begins with the actors reading their lines. The announcer would say, "Welcome to another episode of Wait for Midnight. This week's story is called Who's Calling?" Sponsored by Super Sud laundry detergent. It'll make your clothes sparkly white. That's why they used to call the noir thrillers and suspense mystery shows soap operas. Most of the sponsors were soap companies. Some radio shows were also comedy shows. In the real case, the detectives were stumped. It was a carbon copy of the radio show. The whole team was working their best, but it was hard to pinpoint the connection to the murders. The first victim was a young waitress named Peg. She was home from a long day of work. She puts her favorite radio show on, Wait for Midnight. The new story is called Who's Calling? As she finally sits down to relax and listen to the show, her phone rings. She doesn't get many calls. Maybe it's an emergency, or her mother, or maybe someone from work. So Peg answers the phone. "Hello." She said, "Is anyone there?" But there's no one there. She's about to hang up, and then she hears someone say, "Is Shelley there?" "Sorry," Peg says, "there's no one by that name here." And then click, the phone hangs up. Peg just stares at the phone. That was odd. Then she goes back to her radio shows and thinks nothing of it. Must have been a wrong number. Strange, it's just like the story on the radio. The phone rings. No one there. Wrong number. She was found dead that week. She never got to hear the end of the radio show. But now she was the story. It was all in the news and on the radio. Waitress found dead in an apartment. It was not disclosed how she died, but she was strangled by her own phone cord, just like the radio story. Pop and Smitty were the first detectives to see her dead body. Her landlady called the police in because she didn't see Peg for days. The other tenants complained of a bad smell. It was just like a horror story. Her dead, lifeless body on the sofa. The radio was still on, and the phone cord was around her neck. The paper said, "Poor girl found dead in her own apartment." Public was in a panic. No clues were found. She was murdered with her own phone cord, but why and how did the killer get in? And what was the connection to it? This was not disclosed to the public. The detectives were all over her phone calls received and ones that went out. She didn't have many calls except from her mother and work, and one hang-up. Well, Pop and Smitty worked the case. Then another murder took place the next week. Same modus operandi, same method. Exactly like the radio show Murder. A young girl who lives alone, strangled with her phone cord, was the latest mystery story. This time another girl, Domenica Monti, a cocktail waitress. Her phone record showed only calls were from her boyfriend and a family member. Then one 30-second hang-up call. The same radio show was still playing when they found her body. Now they had 2 murders to solve and connect. But what's to connect to what? The time of death for both was the same as Wait for Midnight radio show was playing. Who's calling? Is this the connection? And still, why and how? In both cases, phone records showed a 30-second call to each victim. Maybe it was wrong number. It was too much like the radio story. A phone rings. They ask for a certain person. Sorry, wrong number. Then the killer finds out that it's a single girl living alone. Killer tracks down girl and somehow gets in or is invited in. Murders with their own phone cord. Now all women are on defense and scared to be alone until this murderer is caught. Pop and Smitty started looking into the radio show connection. It could be anyone, an actor on the show, a cop who knows the case and things the public doesn't know, a listener to the show, or maybe the writer of the show. It could also be a serial killer. Who do you think it could be? And when will this killer strike again? 2 weeks later, same area. A couple nurses were walking home together. One girl, Nancy, dropped off her friend Jillian at her house, and then she walked to her house a block away. It was still light out, and she felt safe, and she was almost home. Jillian went into her apartment, locked the door, and checked the windows. She felt safe enough. That night, the phone rings while Jillian was listening to her radio show. Who's calling? The public was not told of the show's connection yet. It was just a theory the detectives had, but they had no proof. Jillian's phone rings and she answers. Hello, but there was no one there. It was silent. She was about to hang up, and then someone said, Is Jim there? She said, No, you must have the wrong number. No one by that name here. The next day, Nancy went to walk her to work, but she didn't answer. Oh, maybe she left early. But Jillian never made it to work. She was found strangled with her own phone cord. The radio was still left on. The time of each murder was around the time the radio show was playing. Now it's a serial killer Pop and Smitty was after. The whole precinct was on alert for a maniac killer. The show's producers were made to cancel the show midway through. The last victim, the murderer, got sloppy. They thought they never would be caught. But some nosy neighbor noticed a tall, dark man entering the last victim's apartment building. They were ringing all the doorbells to get in, saying, It's a delivery. The neighbor gave the description to the police. The killer got in by asking for a drink while delivering the flowers. The detectives found one yellow rose petal under the victim and a card from the florist on a counter. It was from a local florist, and they got the name of the killer, and he matched the description from the neighbor. He was the producer of the show, Wait for Midnight. He absent-mindedly gave the florist his real name, or maybe he just thought that he would never be connected to the murders. Wait for Midnight was canceled for good. The producer just wanted to see if he can get away with the murders, so he'd call a random number to see if a girl answered and lived alone. He would follow up where they lived from the phone book, from the numbers, watched and waited for a good time to murder them. Then he would ring the doorbells like he was a delivery man with flowers or a package that they had to sign for. When the girl was signing, he would either start to cough and ask for a glass of water to get into the apartment, or just push his way in. He hears the radio show on. Then he strangles her with her own phone cord, just like the story. He leaves nothing behind but the radio still playing. But this time he was caught and the murder stopped. He was found guilty of all the murders. In the courtroom he cried out when he was found guilty, "I only wanted to see if it would work, and I almost got away with it." The radio show was permanently canceled. Case closed. That was Pop's favorite case. Until next time, come back for more of Meg's Mysteries.